It was the kind of moment that people in the comedy world still whisper about, raw, violent, and completely unexpected. In 1978, backstage at Saturday Night Live, two of the biggest comedic egos on television collided in one of the most infamous showbiz blowouts of all time. On one side, Bill Murray, the fast-rising funny man with sharp tongue and a reputation for not backing down. On the other, Chevy Chase, SNL's original breakout star, returned to host the very show he helped launch just a year prior. What happened next wasn't just a shouting match. It was a full-on verbal brawl that escalated into a physical fight, and it changed their relationship forever. Chevy Chase had left SNL at the end of its second season in 1976, a move that left his castmates feeling abandoned. His rise had been meteoric. He was the face of Weekend Update, the first true star of the show, and the public couldn't get enough. But behind the scenes, many resented how quickly he'd shot to fame. When he left to pursue movies, it was Bill Murray who replaced him, stepping into the massive shadow Chase left behind. The tension was already simmering. When Chase returned to host the show in February 1978, it all boiled over. From the start, it was clear the reunion was anything but friendly. Reports from that night paint a brutal picture. The argument started with jabs. Murray mocked Chase's sudden fame and called him a sellout. Chase fired back with a personal insult, reportedly saying Murray's face looked like something Neil Armstrong had landed on. It got uglier. Murray struck back with an even deeper cut, allegedly mocking Chase's troubled marriage, saying, "Go home and F*** your wife. She needs it." And that's when it turned physical. The two men came to blows right there backstage, moments before Chase was due to go live. Cast members tried to separate them. Jane Curtin, Lorraine Newman, and Gilda Radner all later admitted how disturbing the fight was to witness. Curtin described it as very sad and painful, while Newman called the energy in the room really tense. It wasn't some playful scuffle between co-stars. It was raw emotion, decades of unspoken competition finally exploding. The feud wasn't just personal. It was a power struggle, a clash between two comedy giants both desperate to claim dominance on the same stage. The most shocking part? They still had to go on air. Chase went out and delivered a monologue as if nothing had happened, masking the chaos that had just erupted minutes earlier. But the damage was done. Their relationship would never be the same, and the fight became the stuff of legend inside 30 Rockefeller Plaza. For years, neither of them spoke publicly about what really happened that night. No apologies, no explanations, just silence. But that wasn't a full blow-up, not even close. Because just 2 years later, in a strange twist no one saw coming, the two will be forced to reunite on screen, sparking even more questions and an unexpected shift in their bitter rivalry. After the backstage brawl at Saturday Night Live, most people assumed Bill Murray and Chevy Chase would never speak again, let alone work together. The fight had been brutal, personal, and deeply humiliating, and for a while, it seemed like both men were perfectly happy going their separate ways. Chevy, now a rising movie star, was busy cashing in on his early momentum with a string of comedy hits. Murray, meanwhile, was making a name for himself as SNL's sharp-tongued underdog. Their careers were on different tracks, both successful, both full of ego, and both heading straight for a collision. Then came Caddyshack, released in 1980. The film is now considered a comedy classic. But behind the scenes, its production was anything but smooth. Directed by Harold Ramis, Caddyshack brought together a powerhouse of comedic talent. Rodney Dangerfield, Ted Knight, and of course, both Bill Murray and Chevy Chase. For fans who remember the SNL blow-up, it was almost surreal. How could these two guys, who practically tried to kill each other backstage just 2 years earlier, possibly share the screen without tearing each other apart? The truth? They barely did. Murray and Chase only appear together in one brief scene in the entire film. It wasn't even in the original script. Rumors say that once production started, the studio wanted the two biggest names involved to have at least one interaction, purely for marketing. The scene was written last minute and filmed in a single day, And while it turned out hilariously awkward on screen, it was reportedly just as tense behind the camera. But there's a twist. Despite their history, the Caddyshack set didn't explode the way people expected. Why? Partly because the tension between them had shifted. By that point, Murray had developed a new circle of collaborators, Harold Ramis chief among them. While Chase was bouncing between projects, trying to hold on to his A-list status. They were still rivals, sure, but now the playing field had evened out. Neither one could claim dominance anymore. Chevy Chase, at this point, was already building a reputation for being difficult to work with. Stories from other sets, like Fletch, National Lampoon's Vacation, and Community years later, would paint a pattern of erratic, abrasive behavior. Murray, on the other hand, was carving out a persona as the unpredictable genius. Charming one minute, cold the next. Neither of them were saints. But what made their dynamic so captivating was how clearly they mirrored each other's flaws. Caddyshack didn't mend their relationship, but it did prove one thing. They could coexist when the cameras were rolling, at least long enough to deliver one of the most awkwardly funny golf scenes in comedy history. Fans loved it, critics praised the film, and it became a cult classic. But don't mistake the silence for peace. Beneath the surface, the resentment still lingered. They didn't talk about the fight. They didn't joke about it in interviews. It was as if they agreed, tacitly, to keep it buried. And so, the mystery continued. Had they really moved on, or were they just tolerating each other for the sake of the spotlight? Because while Caddyshack might have looked like a reunion, the wounds hadn't healed, not even close. And in the decade that followed, that silence would only grow louder until finally one of them would speak. But that moment was still years away. First came the slow, awkward thaw and one emotional comment that hinted that neither man had truly let it go. For decades, the Bill Murray and Chevy Chase feud lived in silence, unspoken but unforgettable. Neither man rushed to clear the air. There were no apologies on talk shows, no heartwarming reconciliations behind the scenes. Instead, they buried it or tried to. But that night backstage at SNL in 1978 didn't just fade into showbiz history. It haunted everyone who witnessed it and lingered over both comedians like a dark cloud. Ask anyone who was in the building that night, and they'll tell you it wasn't just a scuffle. It was emotionally brutal. Lorraine Newman, one of the original SNL cast members, later reflected that the energy in the room was beyond tense. Jane Curtin would go even further, calling it very sad and painful to watch. These weren't just co-workers watching a disagreement. They were friends watching something break, watching two men tear into each other with years of resentment and ego behind every word. The memory was so uncomfortable, most of them didn't bring it up again. That's how heavy it was. Behind the jokes and costumes, it reminded everyone that even comedy giants could carry serious emotional baggage, and that fame doesn't cancel out feelings of betrayal or resentment. Years later, when Murray finally did open up briefly, it was in a way only he could, cryptic and layered. He described a feud as an Oedipal thing, suggesting it wasn't just about professional rivalry, but something deeper, something primal. The idea that Chase had become a father figure of sorts, someone Murray was destined to overthrow. But the metaphor also hinted at emotional pain, confusion, and maybe even guilt. This wasn't a casual beef. It was psychological, and it stayed that way. Even when both men were at the peak of their careers, Chase with box office smashes like Fletch in the Vacation series, Murray with Ghostbusters and Groundhog Day, they never acknowledged each other in public. Hollywood circles knew about the feud. Industry insiders talked. But to the fans, it was a blank space, an unanswered question that only made people more curious. And yet, in the background, their lives moved forward. Murray began building deeper creative relationships, especially with director Harold Ramis. The two collaborated on multiple projects, forming a comedic brotherhood that felt like a spiritual replacement for any fractured bonds with Chase. Meanwhile, Chase's behavior started raising eyebrows. On set after set, he was being labeled difficult, abrasive, even toxic. The once beloved golden boy of SNL was beginning to lose his shine. So had the feud mellowed with time? Or had they simply gotten better at pretending it didn't exist? That's the thing about public silence. It leaves room for speculation. And in the case of Murray and Chase, that speculation only fueled their mystique. Fans kept wondering, did they ever patch things up privately? Was the fight just a one-time explosion? Or did it mark something permanent? Then, decades after the infamous brawl, came a moment no one expected. A public reunion. The kind that could have gone horribly wrong. But instead, flipped the narrative in the most unexpected way. Because after all those years of cold distance and careful avoidance, Murray and Chase were about to come face to face again. And this time, the world was watching. For years, fans assumed that if Bill Murray and Chevy Chase ever crossed paths again in public, it would be awkward, icy, or worse. A repeat of the storm that erupted backstage in 1978. But in 2025, the unthinkable happened. After decades of silence, sidestepping, and unresolved tension, the two comedy legends appeared together on stage as special Saturday Night Live anniversary tribute. And this time, they didn't pretend the feud never happened. They leaned into it. The moment was surreal. The audience had no idea they'd both be there. Murray was introduced first to roaring applause, making his usual dry, offbeat entrance. Then the lights shifted. Chevy Chase, older, slower, but still sharp-tongued, stepped onto stage. Gasps swept the room. Even the other cast members seemed stunned. No one expected both of them to share the spotlight. Not after everything. And then, just when everyone thought it would be stiff and uncomfortable, Murray broke the silence. With that classic deadpan delivery, he looked at Chase and muttered, "I can't believe they still let you in the building." The crowd exploded in laughter, and just like that, decades of tension cracked. Chase shot back with, "Well, I heard you were here and figured one of us should actually be funny." It was the kind of exchange that felt razor-sharp but strangely warm. Like two veterans who had finally stopped fighting the past and were ready, at least for a moment, to laugh about it. What followed wasn't a dramatic confession or an emotional apology. It wasn't even a real reconciliation, at least not in the traditional sense. But it was something better, honest. Murray and Chase riffed off each other for several minutes, jabbing and joking in a way that only old rivals can. They didn't rehash the details of the fight. They didn't need to. Their very presence on stage together said more than words ever could. The internet lit up immediately. Clips of the moment went viral. Headlines called it a comedy truce, a shock reunion, and the moment fans waited 45 years for. But beneath all the humor, there was something deeper. Both men were visibly older. The sharp edges that once made them clash so violently had softened with age. The feud hadn't disappeared, but maybe it no longer defined them. Behind the scenes, insiders revealed that SNL producers had been trying to make this reunion happen for years, but one or both would always pass. Something about 2025 felt different. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was time. Or maybe they both just realized a fight that once split them apart had become nothing more than a strange, shared piece of history. Something that no longer needed to be hidden or denied. For fans, it was cathartic. For comedy history, it was monumental. And for Murray and Chase, it was a full-circle moment. Two men once locked in a bitter rivalry, finally acknowledging the past and laughing about it in front of the world. But just when the world thought the story had found its ending, one final twist emerged. A comment, buried in an interview, that hinted the real story still hadn't been fully told. To the outside world, the feud between Bill Murray and Chevy Chase looked like a textbook case of egos colliding. Two hot-headed comedians at the top of their game, thrown into the same room under enormous pressure. What could go wrong? But dig a little deeper and it becomes clear. The explosion backstage at Saturday Night Live wasn't just about fame. It was personal, and it had been building for a long, long time. First, you have to understand the weight of SNL in the late 70s. It wasn't just a sketch show. It was a cultural movement. And Chevy Chase, he was the first breakout star. He was the guy, the first one to go from late-night comedy to Hollywood leading man. The first to get name-dropped in magazines. The first to leave the show with a movie career in full swing. That decision, leaving SNL after just one season, left a vacuum, and it was Bill Murray who was chosen to fill it. But stepping into someone else's spotlight is never easy, especially when that spotlight belonged to someone as sharp and self-assured as Chase. Murray wasn't trying to imitate Chevy's cool, detached charm. He couldn't. His comedy was different, scrappier, more unpredictable, a little bit weirder. And at first, the audience didn't know what to make of him. He even had to address it on air, looking straight into the camera and awkwardly begging viewers to give him a chance. It was raw, honest, and incredibly uncomfortable. That's where the resentment began to brew. Murray felt like he was working his way up from the bottom, earning every laugh. Meanwhile, Chase had walked away from the same stage and been handed a movie career. It didn't matter that Murray's talent was undeniable or that he'd go on to star in some of the most iconic comedies of all time. In those early days, all he saw was a guy who got out first and came back like a king visiting his old kingdom. So when Chevy returned to host SNL in 1978, tensions were already boiling. Cast members say the mood that week was tense from the start. Murray was still finding his rhythm. Chase had swagger. And neither one of them could resist throwing little jabs at the other. What started as snarky jokes turned into insults. And by the time they squared off backstage, it wasn't just about comedy anymore. It was about identity, respect, maybe even jealousy. According to multiple reports, the argument escalated fast. Murray went for the jugular, mocking Chevy's marriage, his career, even his appearance. Chase never wanted to back down. Hit back just as hard, allegedly calling Murray out for his own insecurities and reputation as a hothead. Then came the physical altercation, brief but explosive. And afterward, nothing. No apologies. No effort to patch things up. Just silence. Years of it. That's the part most people miss. The fight was ugly, yes, but it was just the climax of something deeper, a rivalry rooted in insecurity and shaped by how each man saw himself and how he thought the world saw him. For Chevy, Bill was a replacement that made him feel expendable. For Bill, Chevy was a golden boy who didn't have to work for what he got. That dynamic never really went away. It just got quieter. Until, of course, the day they both stepped on that stage in 2025. And even then, some things were left unsaid. But not everything, because one more twist was waiting. An offhand remark by Murray during a post-show interview would finally reveal what had really been sitting on his chest all those years. And it wasn't anger. It wasn't a press conference. It wasn't even a planned statement. But in a quiet post-show interview following the 2025 SNL reunion, Bill Murray finally said what fans have been waiting to hear for nearly 5 decades. Sitting across from a journalist known for drawing out the unexpected, Murray was asked a simple question. What did that moment with Chevy mean to you? He paused. For once, no joke, no sly smile, just silence. Then he exhaled and said something no one saw coming. We were never enemies. We were just two guys who didn't know how to be honest with each other. That was it. And yet it said everything. Murray went on to explain, not with bitterness, but with surprising clarity, that the feud had more to do with what wasn't said than what was. Back in the 70s, both he and Chase were young, insecure, and thrown into a pressure cooker of fame. They weren't equipped to handle it. They didn't know how to express fear, doubt, or even admiration. So instead, they lashed out. I respected him, Murray said, probably more than I wanted to admit at the time. He was the first, the face of something brand new. I wanted to prove I belonged there too, and I didn't know how. So, yeah, I got angry. I got mean. That level of vulnerability was rare for Murray, who built a career on aloofness and irony. But here, he was raw, real, And for many fans watching, it felt like the curtain had finally been pulled back. Not just on Feud, but on who these men truly were beneath the personas. He admitted that seeing Chase again on that SNL stage stirred emotions he hadn't expected. Nostalgia, yes, but also regret. We wasted a lot of years being cold to each other. And for what? Ego? Pride? The stuff that feels big when you're young. But later you realize it cost you something. It wasn't just an olive branch. It was a full acknowledgement of the pain and pettiness that had kept two comedic giants apart for most of their adult lives. And in that moment, Murray wasn't trying to clear his name or rewrite history. He was simply owning it. The interview quickly went viral. Fans who had only known the feud through whispered rumors and old SNL lore now saw the human story underneath. It wasn't about who was funnier or who started it. It was about two men caught in the tidal wave of early fame who never learned how to say what they really felt. And what they really felt was hurt. That kind of honesty doesn't erase the past. It doesn't rewrite the fight, but it reframed it, turning what had long been tabloid fodder into something far more relatable. A story not about enemies, but about misconnections, about how silence can last longer than it should. And Murray's final words in the interview? If I had to do it all over again, I think I'd just tell him, "Hey man, I was scared too." That line echoed across social media for days. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. And it left fans wondering, what would Chevy say in return? For days after Bill Murray's interview aired, Chevy Chase stayed quiet. The world waited. Some fans assumed he'd ignore it, dismiss it with a joke, or pretend he hadn't seen it. After all, that had always been Chase's style. Deflect, defend, move on. But then, almost a week later, in a rare sit-down with a longtime friend and journalist, Chevy finally broke his silence. And what he said surprised everyone. He said he was scared? Hell, I was terrified. The words hit like a gut punch, not because of how loudly they were said, but because of who was saying them. Chase had spent decades wearing sarcasm like armor. He rarely allowed the press or anyone else to see behind the curtain. But in that moment, it fell away. He admitted that the 1978 fight with Murray had haunted him for years, not just because it was ugly, but because it marked the end of something he hadn't even realized he valued. Their friendship. Bill and I, we had chemistry, man. When it was good, it was really good. But I left the show at the peak, and I guess I expected everything to stay frozen in time. When I came back, things had changed. People had changed. Bill had changed. And I didn't know how to deal with it. He wasn't trying to excuse what happened. If anything, he seemed exhausted by it, tired pretending like he hadn't been hurt, too. I didn't like how I handled it. I didn't like how he handled it either. But we were kids. Smart ** C's with bad tempers. Everyone talked about the fight like it was this legendary moment. But to me, it was just sad. Two guys blowing up because they didn't know how to say, "I respect you." Then came a moment of deadpan honesty, the kind only Chase could deliver. You know, I've been in a lot of fights in my life. Verbal, physical, emotional. That one, it stuck with me. Not because it was big, but because it never ended. He smirked, eyes glassy. Until now, I guess. Chase went on to say that watching the clip of their reunion on stage had actually choked him up, not because of the laughs, but because of what wasn't said, the fact that it took them nearly 50 years to speak plainly, that neither of them had truly reached out, until it was almost too late. I don't know if we'll ever be best friends. I don't even know if we should be, but I'm glad we finally got to laugh again, without the Bulls tea in between. When asked if he had anything he'd want to say to Murray directly, Chase didn't hesitate. Yeah, I'd say, "Sorry it took me so damn long." And that was it. No grand finale. No dramatic music. Just two old rivals, finally realizing the fight wasn't the story. The silence was. The interview ended with one final line that fans would quote for weeks. Sometimes the longest punchline is just two people growing up, It's rare to see two icons like Bill Murray and Chevy Chase finally peel back the curtain after nearly half a century. For years, their feud had become something bigger than either of them, an urban legend in comedy circles, whispered about on podcasts, dissected in interviews, memed online. It was juicy. It was dramatic. It was classic Hollywood. But in the end, it wasn't really about who threw the first punch, who said the worst insult, or who won. It was about two young men thrust into a spotlight bigger than either one of them knew how to handle. Cracking under pressure, pride, and unspoken insecurity. They didn't fight because they hated each other. They fought because they were scared. Because they saw in each other what they feared in themselves. Because neither one knew how to say, "I admire you," without feeling like they were giving something up. And maybe that's the real reason this story still hits so hard. Because whether you're a comedy legend or just someone trying to navigate your own life, we've all had moments we wish we could take back. Words said too sharply. Relationships left unresolved. Apologies that came too late. Or never at all. But watching Murray and Chase finally face that silence, together, on their own terms, felt like something rare. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't polished. It was just real. Two legends. One feud, and after all these years, the kind of honesty that doesn't need a punchline. Thanks for watching.